I'll call the meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Sure. Carberry Montgomery, I see her online there, connecting her audio.
Here.
Kroll.
Here.
McBurney.
Here.
Obrecht.
And it was there.
I see his name on the screen.
Oh, I see a yes in the chat there. Okay. And then Blake is absent.
All right, thank you. And then is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second, there's discussion. If not, then roll call, please.
McBurney.
Yes.
Kroll.
Yes.
Obrecht. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And Carberry Montgomery.
Yes, Bridget? Okay, so take that as a yes. All right.
Sounds good.
With that,
Thank
we
you.
will move forward. And thanks, Nicole. With that, AJ, I'll turn it over to you for discussion. So.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much. We set aside this time. We only had the singular item on your lunch and learn today. And again, we get done, and it frees up some time for you. But if the discussion takes all the way up to 1 o'clock, it is what it is. We've talked about this. Let me back up. In the legislative session in 2023, the state legislature took significant action to really change the landscape for municipal finance. I know they did a lot of different things, but our focus today is just on the municipal side. And what we internally, and I know that those of you who have discussions outside the office, we lovingly refer to House File 718. 718 is a piece of legislation that was passed by the Iowa legislature and signed by the governor that made all the alterations that we're going to talk about today. And I want to preface this by, I sent out the earlier material, and I'll be making reference to that in my notes. Hopefully you have had a chance to read through it. It was a narrative format, and it was broad-based. It was intentionally broad-based because, again, as I entitled this, what we know, what we don't know, and what's next. And that's really kind of the perspective of how I'm going to present today. And it follows the material that I put out is that, what we know is that changes took place. And they are significant. When I mean significant, I will say that in my tenure as a city manager in the state of Iowa since 1989, this is the most significant piece of legislation that changed the financial landscape of Iowa cities, bar none. There will be, obviously, there's times of recession, there's issues associated with rollback and assessed valuations, but everything brought under one heading, if you will, that this is a significant piece of legislation. And as we've discussed before, and as you followed the legislative action from the 23 session, was the intent of this legislation was to restrict or place restrictions on municipal governments as they looked at raising or adjusting their property taxes. Property tax for us is the straw that stirs the proverbial drink. This is this is the source of the majority of our revenue for operational activities. And by that, I mean the significant operational ones: police, fire, parks and recreation, library, administration. We do have some fee-based activities, but clearly nowhere in the realm of property taxes for generating revenue to operate a city. Previously, we had always talked about in current council and council member elect, you've always heard us talk about the $8.10 limit per $1,000 of assessed valuation. That was the general fund levy. One of the changes that was made is that the legislature took action to take the general fund levy along with 16 other authorized levies under the state code. And those levies could be either implemented by a city council or for the most part had to be voted on with referendum approval. And they combined those into what is now considered, thank you, Nikki, what is now considered to be the consolidated general fund levy. And that levy is set at $8.10, and that's our starting point, as indicated in the screen. That is where all of our discussions will start, and that brings into consideration any of those 16 levies that were removed in the general fund. We did not utilize any of those other 16 levies. So for us, the general fund and the remaining levies that are independent from that are available for the city to utilize at some point. And that includes our debt service, which you're familiar with, particularly those who have served on our CIP committee. You're familiar with the debt service levy. That is the levy that we push out there to support the debt that we borrow to do capital projects. The second one is pensions, which is our requirement for both IPERS and the 411 system. Employee benefits, transit, which is, as we know, our participation in DART. The city years ago provided that authority to the DART board to go up to 95 cents per thousand of assessed valuation to support transit activities. There's aviation, which does not apply to us, tort and self-insurance, which does, Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, Local Emergency Management Commission, and Emergency Services Districts. Those are all now the levies that any city can take advantage of depending upon their particular interest and their position about where they need to draw revenue from. So as we go forward from this point on and into the future, and as you prepare for our budget review discussions in February of next year, we will always be referring to the CGFL. So instead of the general fund levy, this is important because this will be our new vernacular. We'll have to be using that. This is also to consider that the formula that is calculated when you determine how many of those levies you'll use. This is on non-tax TIF revenue. So please understand that TIF is not part of our conversation today. So it may be in the future, but today, as far as this discussion, this only affects our non-TIF based valuations. When I mentioned the new the consolidated general fund levy, and that is the levy that will be applied against the assessed valuation, the three things that will go into our calculations that when they determine that, and this is all part of the new law. So again, I've tried to practice this a bit, but if I stumble, please, we'll have question and answers afterwards. But this is linked to your growth rate. And that was part of the discussion at the legislature, is that they wanted to limit your revenue for Iowa cities. And so if your growth rate, your assessed valuation is less than 3%, there will be no limitation factor, and our levy would stay at $8.10. If the growth rate is between 3 and 5.9, there's a 2% limitation factor, on the revenue, and that would take our levy to $7.94. If the growth rate is 6% or greater, 3% limited factor will come into play, and that takes automatically our growth rate, our levy will be adjusted down to $7.86. Our historic growth rate for the past 10 years has been 4.9% on average. So based upon that history, our CGFL would be $7.94, about 14-cent reduction. And again, this is in the consolidated levy that essentially provides for our most basic services. And the other levies that are available to us, at some point, if necessary, we can shift cost over to those different levies. So as I mentioned, employee benefits, our insurance costs, those, we can take those costs that are currently being paid out of what we know today as the general fund, and those can be shifted to a separate levy. And so those are things to keep in mind because those are under the preview of the council. You can, the state legislature made those available to city councils to essentially shift cost if necessary when needed. The other big changes the state made that affect cities are the homestead and military property tax credits. These are credits that were adjusted and formerly were paid by the state. That is no longer the case. Those credits will be credited against those qualifying individuals or properties that actually reduces their assessed valuation. Not a large amount, but again, if you take them in an accumulative fashion, that they are now, again, that's an amount that a person will pay less on their property taxes on a specific dollar amount. Not a real big issue for us, but cumulative across the state, it was a significant change for something that the state once covered and is no longer covering. And I'll also say, based upon what we understand those to be, you know, I've seen some numbers out there statewide. They're in the millions of dollars, but it is one of those that it really, again, from an impactful for our community and how we go about identifying the funds to operate, that is not going to be a significant issue for us. The other big factor that we've always faced is the rollback for residential and commercial properties. Again, for those of you who've sat through our budget process before, we've heard us talk about the rollback, which is established by the state and released. That information is released in the fall of each year so communities can start planning for that. Last year's rollback, or the rollback that currently affects the current fiscal year we're in, was at 54.65%. Meaning that if you had a $100,000 property assessed valuation on the books, that you were taxed at only $54,000 of that property. This year, the state has reduced that rollback to 46.3%, about an 8.3% reduction. So that is another significant issue as well. And then the commercial property, where last year, or this current fiscal year, I apologize, the current fiscal year, a commercial property, you could apply for and receive the residential rate on the first $150,000 of your value. They've changed that first $150,000 taxed at the residential rate is a given now. You don't have to apply for it. It's an automatic. And that after $150,000, the normal tax commercial rate of 90% goes into play. So again, our community has a sizable amount of property that's at that commercial rate. And again, here are the property tax examples that we put together. As you can see, you know, the assessed valuation at $100,000 rollback applied to it, the city's tax obligation, they would pay $375 for that, for the city share. And remember, we're just talking about the city share, and the commercial property would be at the $3,114. Again, it takes into consideration the adjustments that are made at different stages in evaluation. Other items in the legislation of interest, and for us, you know, we provide our to our respective county, which would be Dallas and Polk County, by March 15th, that outlines the impact of the proposed budget. And the county must then mail out to each property owner a statement broken down by each political subdivision that comprises the taxpayer's taxing district. And so, as Nikki can attest to, we have 32 different taxing districts that affect the city and our residents. Given the fact that we have 6 public school districts, we have 2 counties, we have other taxing jurisdictions, and then we have Those are a lot of moving parts that we have. And so that it's a pretty heavy lift for the county. And that is, again, with all sympathy due to them, that's an issue that they're going to have to gear up and provide for. But we have a requirement to get our information to them by March 15th. And then there will be new requirements for public notices on the budget hearings, which really include a greater requirement for notification documentation. So again, there will be, and I didn't go into the specifics, and we'll talk about that more during our budget process, but this is after all the work that you folks do to determine where it is that you want your operational budget to be. And then you look at providing that information and having additional public hearings to allow for the public to comment. And during those comment sessions, you're allowed to only lower your asking and you can't raise it, even though you haven't certified the deadline yet. So there are, again, restrictions that are in place that basically say when you bring a document out to the public, be prepared that the only direction you can go is downward by your own action, by the council. The certification deadline is April 30th. Other interesting parts of that is that, and I think Councilmember Obrecht raised this before, is that all bond elections, if you're going to go out and ask for the voter approval for a bond approval, when we did Station 43 with our recent Recplex, in the CIP document, you'll see several projects that are identified that have to be voter approved. We typically push those into the out years because there's unknowns. We don't control that in as much as the city council makes a final determination when you're going to place something in front of the ballot, in front of the voters. That now used to have 4 dates. You now have 1 date and 1 date only, and that is the second Tuesday after the first Monday of every November. So that is then held at that election time. So again, they've replaced that restriction. There's a 30% increase in the limits for general corporate purpose and the general obligation bonds. You've heard us refer to the $700,000 limit before about what the council can commit to with a reverse referendum, and that means that you can take action to put it out there to do a project, and that if there's enough voters who come forward and sign a petition or submit a petition that would submit it to a vote, you'd have to. But that's kind of an independent action that the council can take. That has now been raised to $910,000. So there's a 30% increase there. And then when you do development agreements, if they involve a property tax abatement agreement, it's required to have a minimum assessment agreement. And by that, if you're going to provide an abatement, meaning that you're going to artificially use a lower tax rate percentage, you have to have with the agreeing parties an assessment agreement, which means they agreed to have their property assessed at a minimum amount that will then support that agreement. So you can't give a property tax assessment and then they have to say, oh, well, we're going to challenge our property tax valuations. It has to be a minimum assessment. They agree that their assessment for their property will be at a minimum dollar amount for the length of that agreement that you enter into them. So it's really more of a safety net to ensure that there is the assessments off of that property to help to cover the abatement agreement. Getting to the category about the things we don't know, which is probably more than I've listed here, but we don't know what the primary is, that we don't know what our city assessed valuations are going to be from the consolidated rate from Polk and Dallas counties. And they'll be released possibly, and Nikki has more history on this, but possibly the latter week of December, more than likely the first week of January. And again, our historic rate has been less than 5%. That's not bad, that's not good, it's just what it is, and it's a moderate growth city. And again, we are heading into some unknown territory. But our years of conservative budgeting and sound financial policies, and I'll pat everybody on the back who's had a chance to input that and to affect that, it puts us in a very good position financially. And by that, I mean we have options, and council will have options to determine how you're going to determine your levels of operational support for the variety of activities that we're responsible for, and how you're going to pay for them. And that gets back to my earlier comment about the other levies that are available to you. Right now, we're in, like I said, overall, and this is more of a generalized statement, we're in a very good place financially. And, we've taken a look at, during the legislative sessions, what those potential changes were going to be. And we've always taken that into consideration about the unknown with legislation, whether it was in the 23 session, whether it was in sessions previous to that, whether it's going to be sessions moving forward. And that's another unknown. We have a legislative process that begins in January of 24. And the old saying is, no one's safe as long as the legislature's in session. And that's true. And that we're going to see what, if any, additional actions are taken by the legislative groups up there. And we just don't know what they are. I mean, it's crystal balling with a very cloudy crystal ball. And, we can tell you with a high degree of confidence that anything they've done now isn't going to be reversed in the very near future. This was action taken by a legislature that made it very clear that they wanted to affect property taxes in the state of Iowa. And that's the result of this legislation. We have talked about in the past some of the things that might be out there. One of them that affects us greatly would be local option sales tax. We've heard from, at least I've heard from some sources that I feel are fairly reliable, that that there is not a very great appetite at from the Republican side of the House that wants to adjust or go after the local option sales tax. It had been mentioned previously in the legislative sessions in 23, but that's some of the rumblings I'm hearing on the side. That could all change in a heartbeat. People might look at that differently once the legislative session starts, and what other legislative priorities that the majority party in the governor's office wishes to implement. So again, that's one of those things. We'll just have to keep track of it, and we'll have to adapt with any changes that are out there. But again, what changes we have now are significant enough for us to, as we plan for the next budget session, we will adapt to these changes internally, and we will obviously keep council on track as to what your options are. The great thing about it is you do have options. With the $8.10 limit, and if that is adjusted in some way, you have options. And Nikki has put together a spreadsheet based on some of our determinations as what they may be. So Nikki, if you want to take that over.
Sure. For those of you that like to number geek out with me, we did calculate all of this just mostly for our peace of mind, making sure what our best guess is as what we're going to do. We obviously do not have valuations yet. But I ran this out for the full term of the legislative. As it stands today, it's supposed to expire in 29. So we only have to deal with this for the 4-year period that is shown here. So this is our current. And so what I did is, so the state created, the first 3 tabs of this is what the state created, and I just made it what I needed it to be for a better predictor. So they gave us a way to say, all right, this is in theory what your rate's going to be based on your growth, and then you can put in your own valuation increases and stuff, but you can only capture it at one point. So I built it out to show, all right, here's all the years. If we used 4%, 5%, 6%, all the way up to 8%, which is as high as we have ever seen it. And then, oh God, we're only 2% scenario of yuck. So this is the capture of that. I don't want you to get lost in the details other than to say, yes, our rate will go down in all of these scenarios. It's just how much it goes down. We do see revenue growth at every level. So I guess it's more of a rest assured, we'll be fine. 25 and 26, I have zero concerns about the ability to maneuver around what the current legislature is doing to us. So I'm not concerned about that. The 2%, we don't have any cap on there. And remember, any year that we hit 2%, these consolidated rates continue to go down. The CGFL will go down, go down, go down. If at any time I hit 2%, we pop it right back up to 810. That's the way the legislation is written. So we have a ton of options there. So all of these scenarios still showing revenue growth is my main point. And this does not assume any actual change in the other levies, which we 100% will need to use. So what we will do is in a given year, so say we are at the 4%, we're only going to go general fund revenue by 2% if we were only going to affect the 810 goes down to 794. But what will happen then is we will shift and add. We'll max out the 411 for our full pension obligation there. We can access still the employee benefits levy. We are not even touching yet the IPERS and FICA. And then debt service, potentially that's a whole nother discussion with CIP, but we will not be going down past the 1001. I can guarantee that that is not going to occur. But this still allows us to say we are still going to see growth. That's before we even have to start accessing additional levies. But speaking of those, I guess the main point I think for you guys is this is the quick and dirty of these are all the expenses being paid by general fund levy right now. So in your 810, I've got $1.95 of that we could shift overnight. So we've got a ton of flexibility, and I believe that will be true even with adding staff and the normal growth that we're used to. These are all things, and this is in today's dollars, not in the budget that we're getting ready to do. But this gives us a lot of comfort, I guess, in that we're very well situated to weather this lovely storm that we've been thrown in the middle of. So we'll continue to watch that, and as staff going through that, as we get valuations coming in and get staff requests and budget requests, we do have a lot of room to maneuver here, I guess would be the main thing. And then while we watch what happens this legislative season, lost is a huge issue and would be a game changer if they go after that, or if they change anything about this. Until we know that this is a permanent item, if it continues on past 29, we will eventually max this out. $1.95 will disappear, but not even in the 5 years that we're talking about. We're not even close to that. So at the end of the day, that was, like I said, I will share all of these spreadsheets if you love digging into the numbers, but at the end of the day, this is not a panic mode. This is yep, we will weather the storm and figure out how best to still provide the services that we need.
So again, that's where we're at with our assessment at this point in time. Be happy to answer any questions you have. We didn't have anything else planned for our lunch and learn today, just because this is a pretty heady topic, and this is important because it has essentially reset everything for Iowa cities. And again, some cities you'll hear stories or read articles in the paper or on the news media that certain cities have a greater impact than others. We will be financially in a good position to continue to respond to what you as a council believe are the services that our community needs to have. So we have.
Mike is finally working.
I'm sorry, please.
So this is Adam here, and I want to go back to the valuation question a little bit. So the bottom bullet on page 2 of your memo talks about the rollback. Is that going to be our current year CGFL, or does that our current year is our current year, and this only applies to the 24-25 CGFL? So in other words, we're starting at a negative number before we even get into any growth.
This affects for the budget we're getting ready to set. So 24 is the base, and it goes from there. So 25 is the first year we will see a CGFL less than 810.
Right.
Can you hear me? This is Bridget.
Yes. Yeah, we can. I can hear you, Bridget.
Okay, I can hear myself too. That's weird. I guess this is for Nikki. I haven't opened my CIP book, but is get write down something we're still trying to pursue?
So for the plan using the loss to pay it off is what you're talking about, I assume?
Yeah.
We are not going to use it in the way we, 3 years ago talked about continuing to buy it down because the interest rate environment has changed so significantly. So the other factor being costs have gone up significantly during that. So this fiscal year, this 24, so June of 24, is the last one I will call and pay off the Fire Station 43 bonds. We said we would do that with Lost, and this is the year that we can go ahead and do that. Going forward, unless the interest rate environment changes significantly, it doesn't continue to make fiscal sense to call and pay off bonds that are at 2.5%, 3.5%. When I'm now going to turn around and start issuing for 4 to 5%. Rates were still not that bad in April. They are now. So we will continue to evaluate that. The one that we said, yes, this is what we said when we were doing the vote, that we would use those proceeds from local option sales tax to call and pay off those or retire the fire station debt early. And that has been the direction of council, is to go ahead and do that so that one is done and off the plate. So then we will start using those local option sales tax to instead effectively buy down the debt service levy by going directly to capital projects. You've seen the prices coming in. Some bids have been pretty good, some are not so good. So we'll use that after this year because we'll effectively deplete most of it to call and pay off the bond here in June, and then we'll rebuild that balance and then be able to start introducing those into the CIP. So for now, I am not expecting, it's $1.44 today. We've built the CIP to assume a nickel increase based on the cost estimates that we've got there, because we haven't changed that limit for a long time. But yeah, the call and payoff is gone.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
I can appreciate we've thrown an awful lot at you, and we're available for any other questions. We can share the spreadsheets, as Nikki mentioned. Like she said, we didn't want to freak you out with 3 pages of spreadsheets without explanations.
And
I would like the spreadsheets and the narrative that you posted.
Okay, we can get those sent to you.
Yep.
And that 810 that we were talking about, like if it was at 2% or whatever, that's just what the max is for the period of until FY28.
810 has been the limit for longer than I've been alive, I think. It's been a long time, and that one has not changed. That is the max. Because we don't, had we access those other 16 levies, so a library or any of the civic center, all those things, in theory, a city could be above 810 because they're shoving those all in one bucket. But the point is to get everybody down to the 810 or lower as fast as possible. So we will always never be above 810 unless new legislation comes through. So yes, that is the max that we can go on that particular general operations type levy. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Blake, I've been alive longer than Nikki, so I have a little bit more history to it. But at the same time, yeah, other cities that, for example, I'll use Dart. In my previous city, we had a transit system, as small as it might be, but we had a separate levy for that. We also had, it was on the Mississippi River, so we had a levy improvement levy that we could use to move flood improvements, and that could be initiated by a council. There was also one for libraries, as Nikki mentioned. You could do a support for building and for operation, and then for art centers, support for building and operations. Those had to be voter approved. So those 16, regardless if they were initiated by council or initiated through a voter referendum, are now gone, and they're under the consolidated levy. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting fiscal year because, again, we have different timetables, different publication requirements that, we'll build our budget schedule based on meeting all of those. And then, again, the public hearings will have I believe, an additional public hearing that we have to have.
It's kind of the same one. So I was just looking through that. So originally we thought it was adding another one, but
Right.
the limitation, so we've penciled it all out using the example budget process. So going to our 2 meetings a month instead of 3, I will throw a caveat, assume that we're going to need an April 23rd. This April 16th meeting does not line up with our publication requirements. They're recommending we change it to the 23rd to get our clear 10 and 20 day publication thing. Given it's the first year of this process, in theory, we could send it to publish before we set the hearing, but that's potentially not a great idea. So it'll feel like a big gap, right? So we have our budget work session with all of you all February 3rd, and then effectively not much is going to happen until we are legally not able to hold this new, it's called the property tax levy hearing. So this replaces your max rate levy hearing. Remember that lovely one that we all enjoyed last couple of years. So that's no longer there, but this has to be a hearing all by itself. Nothing else can be on it. It has to be half an hour different from the start of the next meeting. So we could still have it on the April 2nd is what that's planned for. And we'll have to have a gap. 30 minutes later, we'll start a regular council meeting. But literally it has to be the only, I know. It is what it is. It literally has to be a separate meeting with a separate agenda, the whole shebang. So we'll have 2 meetings on April 2nd, probably one at 5, one at 6, I would guess. And then based on that date, because we can't set the actual adoption hearing, we have to publish for that 10 and 20. We're going to have to move the April 16th meeting to April 23rd because there's not enough days to get it published with the clear 10-day publication requirement. So past that, that's the main thing, but it'll kind of feel weird. We usually have our work sessions and then just a couple meetings later, we're already starting it to roll through council. We legally can't because the auditor has to mail out those statements. So every single one of you as a property taxpayer will receive a customized letter that says this is what your property is, this is what rate you are going to pay and to whom. So we all have to have that up to the county auditor by no later than March 5th is what they're recommending because they have to be mailed out on March 20th. Statutorily, we have till March 15th, but there's no way 5 days is enough for all of these county auditors to get it out. So they're begging us to try to get it out to them by March 5th. The letters go out the 20th. And they're allowing 5 days for everything to receive a taxpayer. So we cannot hold that hearing before March 25th. So April 2nd is our next available date. So that's kind of the weird thing. It'll look a little clunky and feel like we forgot about everything because it's since from February until we actually start seeing it again. But that's why we kind of built in a little bit of extra time. The February 3rd works the best to give us plenty of time to get all of that to the county still and meet our publication deadline. So it will look a little different, but.
Do we have a communications plan? I know it's kind of early, but with all these changes, how we're telling our story of what all these different things are to the public.
We haven't really started talking per se about that other than probably some kind of a blurb is going to need to go out related to this is what this means. It's legit. It's coming from the county and this is what that means and how to maybe interpret it. They're supposed to be getting us some draft letters of like what this looks like. So then I would assume that we will do some type of go here for further information and it'll kind of show what that all means. I haven't seen it yet though.
Yeah.
Do we still have to do the that like interim publication where we do the max levy?
No, so that's what this one is replacing. So it's very similar to that, but this one is effectively using that one, but after we send a notice to every single property taxpayer to tell them what their impact is, then we get to hold that hearing. So now they're just calling it the property tax levy hearing.
And I'm assuming the state's not subsidizing the cost of those mailings?
Oh, God, no.
No. That is going to be the responsibility of the county.
County auditor, yeah.
Again, when we look at what we have to do, quite honestly, as far as posting and getting our meetings set, that really is very, very easy compared to what the county is going to have to do. Because when you think about the impact of, it doesn't matter the size of the county. You know, there's 99 counties in Iowa, and they all have different population centers and number of property tax owners, et cetera. And that's going to be some that's going to fall on them. And when you look at the legislation, there's a relatively short window there to get information out from point A to point B. And it gets back to your point, Bridget, about us having to say, Mr. Property Tax Owner in Urbandale, you're going to get a letter from the county, respective counties. And they're going to tell you what this is. And we're going to give you some type of understandable, easily digestible narrative that tells you what it's all about. We don't know what it's going to be yet because we haven't had to do it, but you're right. For us, we have to get something out because my guess is the calls will go to the county since the letter's out there, but to preempt it, we should be able to, again, through our communication mechanisms, as best as people pay attention to them, that we're going to get the information out and see what they say. Again, this is going to be, someone's going to get a letter from the county and they're going to say, what is this all about? I mean, there's going to be that level of, I don't understand what this means. And we're going to have to be prepared to be that interim to provide that information.
I know with the bond referendum that happened on the November election, that there was a lot of confusion about the letters that came out that from the county. And a lot of it kind of came up after the election.
Right.
Because I don't think there was a good understanding of why those letters were being mailed out.
Yeah, I happen to have mine that was mailed to me for the Waukee School District, and I got one and my wife got one because we own the property jointly. So we each got a letter.
I think all voters got it. Stella got one too.
Yeah, so this is one that I got, and it just tells you what the measure is. It doesn't give you a financial impact. But there will be letters like this that go out, even if they're, for a bond referendum. They'll send one out. If a city does a referendum now, which will be in every, November will be your limitations, but you'll start getting communications from the county that you're living in, and it can cause some confusions. So we'll do our best to minimize that. What the other taxing entities will do, I'm hoping they will do a similar type of educational process. Are there any other questions? Again, we'll mail out the information. You can take a look at it. We didn't, as Nikki mentioned, we didn't want to overload you, but it's, and again, this is what we know of today. We don't believe there's going to be anything that will affect our budget process for 24-25 year, but there may be an interpretation by some state administrative agency or something that, especially on publication issues, that might squirrel this all up. So we'll see. But again, I think it's important for you folks to recognize that, the immediate impact is going to be more probably on publications and on process versus it is those big, heavy decisions that you're going to have to make. When you have $10 worth of requests that you want to fulfill and you only have $8 to deal with, you're not at that point yet. Any other questions? Mr. Mayor, anything else we can do for you folks today? The weather's cleared up. It looks like it's blue sky, so it should be a nice tree lighting or holiday light ceremony tonight. As I said, if you have any questions, please give either Nikki or I a call. And if we don't know the answer, we'll make up something good that sounds good.
At least you're honest.
Well, I kind of feel that the state legislature kind of made it up as they went. So It's all fair game.
Bob, you're on mute.
Bob? Yeah.
You're still on mute.
All right.
There we go.
What happened there? I had it on earlier. I was just asking if they mandated that we have to serve punch and cookies for the special hearing, or we have a special dress code, or
Not that we're aware of. You know, we seem to do better when we offer treats for meetings, whether they're celebrations or anything else. And I think people, you know, they kind of respond to that. But at the same time, and again, in all seriousness, city councils here in Urbandale have been prudent, and we do not generate a lot of comments or interest from folks either on the CIP side or on the budget side until it's multiple months afterwards, and we've had multiple public hearings and notifications, and someone shows up and says, I didn't know. We had a gentleman last night for the comp plan review with the Planning and Zoning Commission who said, when did this all happen? And he was quite angry that he didn't know anything about the whole comprehensive plan redo. So, again, we've all dealt with those citizens and we do our best to inform them. But, again, we'll see. We could offer punch and cookies and we'll see who goes.
all right, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for the information. Good questions. We'll weather through this. So.
Okay, we'll see everybody tonight, 5:30, lighting ceremony.
All right.
I know, Amy, you said you're not going to be able to make it, so.